Welcome everyone! For the ones of you who don't know me yet, my name is Zucconi and I'm a lecturer in artificial intelligence and a science communicator. And if this is the first time you're joining the show, well, a warm welcome to Gamedev Graveyard. This is the weekly show where we talk about failed projects and games that didn't make it and prototypes that never got released. Now, as always, today we still have a guest. Before I introduce him, if there is any problem with the audio, feel free to leave a comment and hopefully we can fix it. You know that when we're live and when there's a guest, you never know if things are going as planned. But it's really it's really a pleasure for me to introduce today's guest, which is Jerry Belich. Now, Jerry has been quite a long time friend of mine and is a game designer and a creative tech maker. And he literally has decades of experience in a variety of different fields. And it's also relatively well known in the game dev scene for basically his alternative controllers. He has made several of them, and one of which I think went pretty popular, and is Choosatron, so it's the one you might know him for. And it's a sort of choose your own adventure. It's a physical box with a receipt printer, and basically based on the buttons you press, you can print your own story. It's quite an interesting thing that I've seen being cloned around a few times. And Jerry actually designed the alt.ctrl award for 2018, meaning that the people who actually won the alt.ctrl award actually received a thing he made, which I think is really, really cool and really shows the level of respect that he sort of got within the industry. He's also a designer of escape rooms, including Utopia Escape Room in Minneapolis, which won the Golden Lock-In Award in 2017. I have not had a chance to play myself, but I heard very, very good reviews. So, I can safely say that, he's the person you want on your team during a zombie apocalypse. And I think that given the situation, he's definitely the right person to invite. So without further ado, hi, how are we doing?
Hello. Good to be here, Alan.
I know, right? So,
You
do you
didn't
want?
tell me I was worthy of respect. That's good to know.
Well, maybe I lied, you, you have to sell the thing, right?
Yeah. Pretend to be the thing you want to be. Respected.
So, do you want to talk a bit about yourself, what you're doing, what you've been up to, what didn't I talk to that I should have done?
Sure. I mean, a quick summary about me. I'm one of those people that is frustrated that there are never enough hours in the day and years in a lifetime, because I really like learning new stuff. And ever since college, really, I spent a lot of time in technical fields, but also equally in creative fields. So I spent time in theater, studying film, computer science, all of these things together, which just ended up working on projects that melded those different things. And then it was, yeah, about 7 years ago, maybe eight now, where I created the Choosatron, which opened up this whole new world to me of electronics. And it had been one of those kind of hobbies at first that sounded really cool, but just never quite had time to jump into. Uh, but while working at an agency, I was talking to a creative team and asking how they do prototyping. And I was like, oh, Arduino, that sounds so interesting. Like, I've looked at those and I've wanted to get them. And then they sent me one the next week, and I was like, oh crap, I have to make something with this because it was a gift. Uh, and so that's really interesting to me, the idea that it's like there's kind of a responsibility that comes along with, like, here, have this thing, now go make a thing. But yeah, I love alternative controllers. I love spatial and tactile game design, and escape rooms have been a really great space for that because they're also very fresh and new, like alternative controllers themselves. And there's still not very many rooms that really get into the deep technical automotive stuff.
It's quite interesting. We're watching Choosatron now. So, what was your sort of design behind Choosatron? Is it stuff that you had around and you just joined it together, or was there a plan? How did it came to be?
It started because at the time I was running a mobile development team, and I was getting fatigue around touchscreens, and I was just really frustrated that everything was now touchscreen. It's like, oh, look, you can have any kind of interface as long as it's two-dimensional, flat, and you don't get any feedback. And so when I came up with this idea, and the reason I came up with this is I literally went through Adafruit components A to Z, reading about every single one. When I came across the thermal printer and I came across the coin acceptor, which was in the first few versions, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to make a coin, like a interactive fiction arcade machine. But from that point, because of my fatigue with displays and touchscreens, the design challenge I set for myself was no like externally digital outputs. So it had to just use like physical inputs, physical output, and that was just kind of a way for me to escape what was frustrating me.
I think that's a very good reason, and it's something I really like about alternative controllers as well. The fact that they give you the physicality that no games can. You can create like emotional storytelling, blah blah blah, whatever thing, but you don't have the feedback. And I don't know if you remember my first alternative controller that I made was literally inspired, I think, by Pacific Rim. You know, the movie where they have where
Yeah,
they have like the sort of mecha controllers, and I wanted that feeling because so many games have like big robots and stuff, but none
yeah,
of them give you the actual feeling of that. Of course, mine wasn't as sturdy enough that you could actually do like this, and I think that most Arduino's creation fail the Pacific Rim stress test, but which is now a term, I guess. But
yeah,
I think that it's what people loved, and it's a fact that because it was something new, because it was something that people have not really experienced before, suddenly it was fresh. Suddenly it was like, oh, okay, even if it's rough around the edges, I enjoy it. It's a bit like the first Tetris or the first like Pong, rubbish
yeah,
games, but because it's the
yeah.
first one, it's
It
like,
was
well,
novel.
I can play it.
Yeah, and there's something to that of packaging up new things in novel packages to get people to try something that maybe they normally wouldn't. Now, if all it is that like novel outer shell, then maybe there isn't a whole lot of substance and much to learn. But if you put some other stuff in that package, there's a great opportunity to see how people might approach a new kind of technology, a new kind of interface, uh, all sorts of new stuff.
And it's kind of interesting. We also have a couple of comments already. And Sios Ukas, I'm so sorry if I did not pronounce your name correctly, says, yeah, if I choose a Tron. And he says that
Yay!
no haptic feedback is such a bummer indeed. It is. It's really bad. And, it's something that I think, screens are really great, I guess. But I know I'm a kid from the 90s.
Yeah.
I want my joystick, I want the physical controllers, I guess. I really like that. And it's a bit of a shame that, we can't have that. But at the same time, I'm really glad that we do not have 15 peripherals for 50
Yeah.
different games. I remember the time where, there was almost one to one, like you had the glove and you have the joystick and you had like the thing that you hold it like this, and that's the steering wheel. It's too much.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And then every time you were moving or cleaning out the house, you had to go through that agonizing process of, do I sell this stuff? Am I going to immediately regret that? Um, I kind of dream of a future where we all have these mini assembly lines of like, I've got my 3D printer and I've got my pick and place machine and my PCB machine, and it just kind of and makes that new thing. I mean, it's probably rather wasteful, but maybe it's all made out of some kind of like cornstarch or something, and then you just put it in your vat to dissolve it and
We should do
recycle
that.
it.
So I think we can say that out control are really not Marie Kondo friendly. I'm I'm trying to I'm trying to live with as few objects as possible. I'm trying to simplify, go minimal, and
Yeah.
I realized I have like 3,000 components. electronic components. So I just like shipped all of them to my office, and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
forget about them. It's too many. You cannot be minimalistic, I guess, if you're doing alternative controllers.
No, no, it definitely triggered some hoarding tendencies in me that I've had to fight back. Because I was collecting a lot of stuff because you can make an argument for anything.
Exactly, and
A wig is an alternative controller. Like,
if you use it properly, it could be. I
or
guess.
improperly, I guess.
I guess. And it sort of reminds me of Robin Baumgarten, which is the creator of a series of wobbly
Yes,
contraptions. And
yes.
basically, in the original version, he used a door stopper
Mm.
as the actual controller. So I guess everything can really become an alternative
Yeah,
controller.
and it's brilliant. It's so brilliant. Robin, yeah, I don't know if there's someone overall that I respect the work of more than Robin. Like his designs are like really inspired. And what I loved about Line Wobbler was it wasn't just novel. It wasn't just that like shell of like, oh look, a funny weird interface and like the strip of LEDs. The game was minimalistic but distilled so much in such a small space. And and I mean it shows, right? Because it's invited absolutely everywhere and for good reason. It is one of the most accessible alternative controller games I've ever seen.
And something that I think people don't realize is that when they say something like line wobbler, but I'm sure it applies to a lot of other controllers as well, maybe Choosatron as well, is that
Mm.
Robin iterated on that so much. Like I
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
there for the entire time, but there was a brief period in which we sort of co-worked together, and he was working on that relentlessly so many times, and it was like, Robin, it's a dot moving. What else can you do with it? And he said he tried variants at different events. He tried like a Christmas one. He had like, so he literally went crazy and experimented so much. And I think that
Yeah.
he didn't stop just with the first iteration, which was good enough. He kept making it and working on it until it was good, which I think,
Yeah.
really shows that even an alternative control they knew, but if you really want them to sort of get to the next level, I guess you need really to work, especially now that it's getting quite
Yeah.
popular. Now
It's a really good point. Yeah.
we have a few comments from Federico Fascia that says bring back the Dreamcast and its
Oh
endless
yeah.
thousands of weird controllers. Um, and
C Man. I loved C Man.
too many. Um, and he's asking an interesting question.
Mm.
Do you think that alternative controllers open better playful spaces because they're not necessarily tied to a set of coded rules? What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think alternative controllers still have to play by the rules of design as a whole. And I'll explain what I mean. So when we do exhibits at Alt Control GDC, for instance, it sometimes it was really tough to get people to interact or play with something because it just really wasn't clear what was okay and what wasn't. They're afraid of breaking things, stuff like that. So there's still a certain set of constraints that I think any design physical item has to be very aware of. But the fact that you can raise so many like interesting questions and allow people like to discover a lot of new things by interacting them, I think yeah, they open up a huge like new play space. Um, and I think of things like escape rooms as a way like that is one form codifying these different kinds of alternative controllers integrated into a like greater narrative experience. Um, but if you imagine like say every alt control project was taken to the design level that Robin and I brought Line Wobbler and Choosatron respectively, because Choosatron went through that too, right? It was a $75,000 Kickstarter. Like it went through a heck of a lot of iteration and design. Um, and you can and I think you can see that polish in the way it works and again like how accessible that is for people. uh, I think alternative controllers that are able to go through at least some of that process, uh, there are so many options for like how those could be integrated in the spaces that we explore every day. Whether it's just kind of this strange artifact you come upon, like in a park, to something where it's maybe more expected. You're in a museum, and so you're expecting new and different things. I've done talks all about kind of the context of experience and experience bleed, and how the context of where I am and what I'm doing before I come upon this item, this experience, this artifact affects that experience, and what I can do as a designer to try and dip into that or be cognizant of the fact that people are coming from different places. But yeah, I mean, the space is virtually infinite.
And what I've noticed is that a lot of alternative controllers are taking over spaces that are not usually spaces for games. For example, I think now it's dead probably, but when they built a fountain in Granary Square in King Cross here in London,
Yeah,
basically on the fountain through an app you can actually play Snake with the water jets. I'm not saying it was the best game, and I tried and it
yeah,
wasn't working for me, but I really appreciate the fact that they try to integrate something, playful.
yeah.
Maybe calling a game it's a bit too much. Something playful within a space that is not designed for playful experiences. And I see often lights on the street, and every time I'm sending pictures to Robin, this could be line wobbler. Like,
Just a whole row of
it's a
streetlights.
whole room, and I think that there is, yes, there is there's a cost to maintain those kind of things, which is, we can't ignore, to be fair. But at the same time, I think that it opens up the possibility to reimagine what gaming means, because a
Yeah.
lot of people, especially the larger audience, they sometimes tend to perceive games as something you play on your phone when you like when you're bored on the tube. So they perceive games as something that kids play or something that you play to waste time, and they don't see it as something that can bring people together. And I think that
Hmm.
having a public space that is designed so that it can be playful,
Hmm.
regardless whether or not it's an alternative, whether or not there's an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi hidden somewhere. I think can be pretty revolutionary in terms of architecture. And do you had any experience with that? Do you had any input on that?
Yeah, I think that's one reason, especially right now, it can be useful to focus on the act of play and playfulness rather than games. Not that some of those things can't necessarily be games, but I think people are a little bit more open to the idea of playfulness. Um, and so and it's frustrating that those kinds of definitions affect people's perception, but it's kind of the way it is sometimes. Um, I also was thinking about, oh shoot, it dropped out of my mind. Uh, uh, Augmented reality. So whenever people talk about augmented reality, my mind does not jump to like, I've got my iPhone up and I can see like 3D models floating around my living room. Like to me, it's always been like, well, how do we connect people to spaces around them in really magical ways? Like to me, it's all about magic. I want people to be like, I don't necessarily know what's happening here or how it's happening, but I'm in love with it.
So
Like I
fuck
want the
electronic,
world,
let's do magic.
yeah, I want the world to be Harry Potter land. Like and there's a lot of option for that. Like the what you're talking about with the fountain, I think that's like a form of augmented reality.
If it
Um,
worked, it could have been.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I also love the design of objects that give you feedback about aspects of the world around you, but in very like subtle and like beautiful ways. So there's kind of this spectrum of design when I think about physical spaces of like providing information or feedback playfully, providing just kind of a brief escape from things, or a focused connection with certain things, and then actually like going to the other end where it's like this is a game that's just played on a different kind of playing field, and using that as another way to connect different people coming in. Like museums struggle with this a lot. They are always trying to create experiences that are connecting people and creating playful and even gamified atmosphere, but they also have to deal with the constraints of, okay, we want people to come in and play this stuff together and get something out of it, but also people can enter and leave the game anytime they want, and maybe they only play for 30 seconds, maybe they, like there's all of these different constraints that really pull in wildly different directions, that kind of demonstrates just how difficult it can be depending on what it is you're trying to achieve.
So something that I think it's kind of interesting is that we've been chatting for more or less like 15 minutes, 20 minutes about alternative controllers, and I think that if people thought that they were easy to make, well, not really. I think it's much harder, especially because let's be honest, if you fucked it up in Unity, well, whatever, you restart. If you fuck it up with Arduino, it's another £50 or $80, how much it is. Uh,
It's
when you see
expensive,
the
yeah.
magic smoke coming out of a transistor, it's like, no, again.
I'm actually, you'll appreciate this. I'm actually working on a graveyard for my dead
Perfect.
microcontrollers. Uh, so like I've been saving every one that I've, poofed, and they'll all be in their own graves, and then there will be one living microcontroller hidden in the graves that's actually controlling like the lights and the spooky sounds
It's
and
a
all that. I want to
zombie.
make a
So,
exactly.
so,
It's the
so
zombie.
basically, the living one is buried in the
Ugh.
coffin, and I think
Control.
I would need like a soccer field for all the ones I've burned. But I think that this to me brings to an interesting question, which is the fact that what is the business model of alternative controllers? Because like they're
Mm,
expensive. I mean, it's not as easy. I think that when you go digital, you have the freedom that you can make infinite as many copies as you want.
yeah.
So you produce one, you produce infinitely many. With
Hmm.
alternative controllers, you produce one, it breaks, it costs a lot.
Back to zero.
Back to zero. If you leave it unattended, it explodes, or people get electric. Maybe they don't with 5 volts, but things can go wrong.
Yeah.
So it's much harder. So and many things can go wrong, and it can be very expensive. Like to start with alternative controllers, it's not unusual that you might end up spending at least $100 just to get stuff, just to get a very
Mhm.
basic. And then if you want to laser cut, if you want to 3D print, if you want to build custom stuff, then it's all on top.
Yeah.
So the question is, obviously you've been doing it for quite a few years. So the question is, why and how? What is the business model? What do you get out of that? Do you get
Yeah.
anything out of that?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. So this question has been asked many times to me and probably others, especially at alt.ctrl GDC, which, as you know, has a lot of like business game industry folk. And I'd get that of like, well, how are you going to make money with this? And like on the surface, it sometimes is kind of an offensive question because it's like, well, I mean, you've heard of art, right? Like you've heard of stuff that people make to bring joy and like, and I think first and foremost, that's valid. Making something that can't be replicated is special. Like the ephemerality of that is interesting to me. Um, Now, digging a little bit deeper, there is some validity to the question. Like, how do I actually continue doing this work and feeding myself and paying rent and all of that? And what are the benefits of it? Now, the biggest benefits for me is like after I made Choosatron, it opened up a lot of doors as far as other kinds of business opportunities. So different kinds of freelance work, so part of it was just indirect. Like I learned these new skills. I was able to create kind of these strange physical electronic things, and other people need that. It may be getting paid to create an installation for a museum. It may be for creating an escape room like Utopia. And escape rooms, like if you've got a good one, do really, really well. I mean, it's a very fresh industry that has so much more space to develop. Um, and finally, I think there are models for doing like small runs of bespoke devices and selling this. I mean, people are doing this with a lot of different things. Take ceramics. Like for probably similar costs, I could make small runs of very specific little experiences and sell those things. Now, it's honestly the harder part is when you have to mail everything. Because weight with electronics, batteries are extremely difficult to ship. Um, but people are interested in this stuff, and I was able to fund my work for a few years off of the Choosatron Kickstarter while doing that manufacturing and producing everything. Um, and part of it is the creative development. I think it has made me a better game designer and as a whole, like for digital game design as well. I also like have ADHD. I get distracted easily. I get very tired if I'm not moving and I'm just sitting in front of a screen. Um, that can be very frustrating. And there's
So
something
I hope
about,
this is not too stressful.
oh yeah, I'm barely awake, Alan. Uh, but there's something about working with your hands. There's something about like physically working with materials that keeps me focused and interested in the task. I mean, I think artistically, creatively, like it also helped me kind of develop my process of how I like to prototype. Uh, it's very easy with digital prototyping to just keep going and keep working on something when you really need to like kind of stop, evaluate, and spin up another iteration. Um, the alternative controllers really like put kind of a exponential curve on the work that's required to like really polish it up. And so rough and quick experiences that are bespoke or that only happen once can work. With the like code frameworks I've made and with the experience with microcontrollers I have, and just having parts around, I can create rough experiences that don't have to survive for months and months very, very quickly. One of those that you saw on the list behind Burning Ritual was basically I learned how to make candles. And once I found out that you could buy zinc core wicks
Oh my
and that
god.
I could get enough of a signal through, I created my own candles. I soldered the end of the wick to a wire to a microcontroller so I could detect if this candle was being lit, if blowing it out, stuff like that, uh, through different means. And I threw a bunch of LEDs around it. I made a copper pad for a bowl and a base for the candle, so I could basically detect what actions the user was doing, wrote a script for it, and I made an interactive ritual that is able to pace itself and work with the person performing it rather than being a video you watch or an audio track you're listening to on its own. And that was something I did, like, other than the learning how to make candles part, and a few days of coding max. um, so that's, I mean, there's a lot of answers, I guess, that I kind of shoved in there. Um, is it easy to survive based off that? No, it's not. And we've talked about this before, but I was a professor of game design for 3 years, and one of the reasons for that was being an educator does allow you a flexible schedule. It did allow me to continue creating new work, traveling, exhibiting that work, and that's one of my favorite things to do. So it has paid for lots and lots of travel, that's for sure. I get invited to lots of interesting places. I get to meet a lot of interesting people. And the other part of that is, if like I'm an extrovert, so this is kind of a
The
good thing for
worst.
me all the
The
way around.
worst.
But the networking alone has been incredibly valuable. I have networks of people now, and like, because right now I'm looking for a more of a long-term job for kind of the next stage of my career. And it's really nice that I can like prod different successful people in the game industry and be like, hey, can we just chat for an hour? I'd like to pick your brain about what might be like a good next step for me, or I want to talk to you about narrative design, or whatever. Honestly, the biggest downside of me working in such a niche space has been that people assume that if it doesn't involve hardware, electronics, that I wouldn't enjoy doing it. And the thing is, I've always loved digital game design. I'm going to keep doing digital game design and keep enjoying it. Uh, like this is just something that I love to do as a hobby. I love to do it to keep sharp as a designer and as an experienced designer. And I mean, yeah, escape rooms is super fun. I could do that forever.
Hopefully not escaping. So we have a few questions in the chat. One from Tim. Hi Tim. Is asking, evening Alan, question for Jerry. I see you're working with MST3K writers. What would you say there
Yes.
are other aspects of mind Western culture in your work?
Oh, that's an interesting
It's a tricky
question.
question.
It's a really tricky one because I mean, I've been somebody that traveled a lot even when I was young. Like my parents took us a lot of different places around the world. So I never felt super regional. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of blind spots there in terms of like what makes me a Midwesterner. I was always more honest than Midwesterners. I was never kind of uh like that kind of awful kind of polite, I guess. I don't know, but I think maybe honestly our sense of humor. I grew up with MST3K. I grew up with shows like Let's Bowl, which is bizarre. It's basically a Judge Judy like courtroom, like solve problem between two people kind of show, except with bowling,
I'm glad I
and the
don't watch
announcers
TV.
are very messed up. Um, so I think the biggest Midwestern part of me would be the humor and the strange kind of, I don't even know how you describe our humor, but I don't know. That's a good question. I'm actually gonna keep thinking about that a bit.
So there's another one from Federico Fascia. What do you think
Yeah.
about experiments like playdates? Can it be sustainable creating small game system aimed at a very specific
Yes.
audience? And can we see in games something like teenage engineering in music?
Oh, I love Playdate. It's in my hand right now. I actually, I mean, I'm sure you can't see the screen.
We
Um,
tried. It's too reflective. We can't see anything.
yeah, but I actually finished the Choosatron story parser for this the other day. So I can dump Choosatron binaries right on the device, and I can sit and scroll, and it's very fun. So to answer the actual question, uh, I think there's a lot of room for that. I think that speaks to kind of the bespoke uh, uh, thing I was mentioning earlier, because Choosatron's a console, right? Like it's not just a game; it is a console for playing a certain kind of game. Um, and the beautiful thing about that was it was open to lots of contributors and lots of different kinds of writers. Um, and Playdate, I think, is like that. The idea is providing this very simple set of constraints for a very specific kind of carved out space of experience. Like, think about all the things that just this device implies. Like, one, portability, right? Like, this is something that you should always be able to have with you. Two, the accessibility of creating stuff for it. And the way they're talking about releasing stuff is that there's always like some new little fresh, interesting tidbit around the corner. And by encouraging these kind of oftentimes shorter experiences by designers that have cut their chops on a lot of different things before, uh, it it is allowing people to get all of these interesting little design ideas out that they might not do otherwise because spinning up Unity is an expensive mental task. And that's why I love little engines like Pico 8. Love 2D is kind of a next step up from that. Um, Things like that. And actually, it's one thing I love about making games for microcontrollers. It's so constrained. Like I don't, and I don't have to think about displays if I don't want to. I can just be like, it's there's an LED, a single pixel. That's your display. Enjoy it. Oh yeah, there's mushrooms. Um,
Do you want to talk about projects like these? I think that there's something really interesting when we sort of work with limitations, like
mm,
you know you think that with a game engine like Unity you can do everything, and then for people maybe like us that that used to make games drawing pixels, now
hmm
suddenly the idea now suddenly the idea that you can't do that anymore with Unity, and that
hmm
paradoxically drawing a single pixel in Unity, it's a bloody nightmare.
It
uh,
is a nightmare.
I know, right?
Why?
I know, right? And I remember we were chatting about this yesterday when we were testing this. And I think that the natural question is that Unity is investing so much in stuff like ECS, ML agents, packages. I don't know, it's doing so many things. And I think that a lot of
Yeah,
them are really good. The rendering pipelines. But they have not done the two basic things that I would expect from a game engine. One is saving system, and the second is being able to draw natively on an image.
yeah,
So I want to say this pixel needs to be red. You can't do it. You can't bloody
yeah.
do it. And I don't know. So what was your experience with Pico 8 about that?
Oh, I love it. It's just it's so raw with such a simple set of tools. I like being able to keep kind of the entire like digital world in my head at one time. I like being able to step through the logic mentally and like, all right, here's my update loop, here's my draw loop. Like, what do I want to do? What do I want to be persistent? Um, and when I was teaching, it was startling how many students had never been exposed to what a game loop even is. And so I found Pico 8 a really great tool for exploring way down there, but without it being like assembly language or even C code. Um, and when we talk about like prototyping and how valuable that is to figuring out ideas, maybe testing out mechanics, uh, I don't, first of all, I'm not an artist. I don't want to hire somebody to make art because I'm prototyping something dumb like little racing pixel horses. Um,
Like we see
and
here on
so
screen.
exactly. So when I can just be like, I'll just draw a little square here, and maybe I'll mess with some, pixels over here, and then you can kind of build. And I really like that it's the simple set of building blocks, uh, and it helps really focus in what it is that I am trying to create. Not to mention, it gets rid of a lot of distractions. A lot of experiences that I want to make are not about like graphical fidelity. It's just not part of it. Um, Aesthetic and visuals are very important to me, but usually they take a very different form. Like one game I'm pretty sure you played it or saw it at some point, Dark Side of Balloon. It was like a 2D brawling game between two balloons, and on their own they couldn't do any damage to each other, but they could pick up kitchen knives and cacti and stuff and throw them at each other. But for that, like it was all about the aesthetic of that squishy balloon and making those feel as rubbery and squishy as possible. And so the fidelity there and the aesthetic there centered around that. Um, and like you could make that like look just crazy good or even really bad, but uh, it was finding that sweet spot there. Now that was in Unity, but it was also extremely hard to prototype and build because we had to create a whole new mini physics engine for it because we can't draw.
Of course, of course. But so something interesting is that when I was watching the Pixel Horse game,
Yeah.
the first things I was thinking about is like, how do I make the trail pixel perfect in Unity? And like thinking about it, like you can use a trailer renderer, you can use a line renderer. So maybe you need to generate every second like a quad small enough to be rendered,
Oh no.
and it's like, no, this is
Oh, what a
wrong.
nightmare.
Like
What
if
a
you lose
nightmare.
control, if you have completely lost control over something so fundamental as the pixels, then there is something wrong with your game engine, I think. And
Yeah.
even drawing something like lines, you know, shapes or circles, it's one of the reasons why Orbitalis, you know, one of the games I made, did not end up being made in Unity, because the entire graphics of the game was made drawing shapes. There
Yeah.
was not a single image. Well, maybe the menu icons, maybe the icon of the game. Everything else was done with lines and circles and ellipses and gradients. And I mastered those ones because, you know, I come
Yeah.
from that generation. And suddenly the idea of not being able to have control over pixels, but now, you know, it's like, no, I'm sorry. Where is the unlit shader? You know?
Yeah.
And it's something that
And I
if,
mean,
yeah, go on.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go on, go on.
And I was just thinking about like, so for something like the horse game that you showed previously, like even something like that, one of the reasons it's so simple is because of what I intended to do with it. And maybe someday I will, but the whole purpose of that like racy horsey game was to create a Twitter bot that would post like at the beginning of the week, like, all right, a race is about to begin, like get in your bets. And then any Twitter user that would reply to it with, just kind of a certain set of commands could then place bets on different horses. It would generate a GIF, and then it would upload that so people could watch the race and have games that are stretching out maybe over a day or over a week where different Twitter users are gambling on these miniature horse races with these little colored squares that they get to know through different ridiculous horse names and statistics. Uh, and so the aesthetic really needs to be as simple as possible. And there are other kind of aspects that I wanted to do of that or add to that, like I wanted to add like a front view camera briefly where you just see a giant cube that's like bouncing up and down, galloping.
I would absolutely love that. I would absolutely love that.
But I mean, that was the idea of this is it actually was inspired by a game I used to play in elementary school to get bullies to leave me alone. I started a gambling ring with flea races. And so I would draw lines down a strip of paper. I would name them all. I'd have people put their bets in a hat. And then I would just go down the rows hitting dots. And I wouldn't know what people had bet on to keep it fair. And then whatever I randomly hit across the finish line first was the winner. And the people that were kind of jerks were really into that. And so I just became a bookie, and that was how I dealt with bullies.
So we have a question from Bitcrusher. What's the mushroom game? Balance water and sunlight? Hmm.
So yeah, it's kind of two things. About a year and a half ago, I started collaborating with my friend Victor Thompson on something called Nature Machine. And I was very stressed out at the time. You may remember I had about a half a semester left of a 3-year MFA, working on my thesis. A lot was going on, and I needed to work on something that felt nice to me, like that didn't hurt my brain and feel like work. Uh, and so we started collaborating on these nature scenes, but it was actually all done in Unity, of course, because they were for big projections. But while we were doing that, Victor had gotten me really interested in mushrooms. He's like, "Have you ever watched time lapse mushrooms on YouTube?" And so we did it for like an hour. It was great.
Oh my god!
And
Now I feel I should Google them, right?
yeah, it's good. It's really good. And so then I started making this Pico 8 version while we were working on the Unity version that was different. And with a similar idea that I wanted it to just be this calming thing. I wanted an ever-growing garden. I meant to release it a year ago. I probably should soon. The idea was going to be that once you open the garden, it's very static, it's very slow growing. And then the longer you have that garden, you can then go into the menu and have it generate a GIF that's a time lapse of all the growth thus far. So that fast growing explosion of color would, there you go, would be a reward
There's
for,
some slime
like,
mold as well in there.
we have the slime mold in Nature Machine. It's excellent. But that would be a reward for kind of tending to this weird little garden. And then I also meant to make a Twitter bot that all it did was like once a day generated a new garden and put it out there. God, I love that. I love the skirt.
What the hell is that? What the
It's
hell is
excellent.
that?
So we watched some of these exact videos while working on Nature Machine because we have a night forest scene. That's the one that has all the mushrooms in it. Um, but it was just really fun to sit and come up with different styles of mushrooms and then see how I could blend them and procedurally grow them. Um,
And they also
so yeah,
look
just
incredibly
palming art.
toxic.
The rain and the sunshine one was me co-opting that mushroom garden for a Pirate Jam controller, that one where you had to pour water into a device and it would measure how much water was going through it. And then I put just a photo cell on it so that two people would play the game together and try to balance those two resources, and then that would trigger the growth of the garden. So that was, and I do that a lot where in order to test out a new alternative controller idea, I'll grab a digital thing that I've already made and just use that as a test bed for creating that controller.
I think, sorry, I'm absolutely like, I have to stop them. I
Oh, they're so
there's,
good, aren't they?
there's I'm completely like, I've lost my mind watching Mash. I know
Yeah,
what to watch tonight. Like,
I
oh,
guess the actual the final important thing I wanted to say about that is the reason mushrooms, the reason for some of the other nature scenes we made was, I guess typical meditation doesn't work very well for me. At least I haven't figured out how it's very effective for me. But one thing that does work well for me is if I can find systems that my brain is really interested in that it cannot solve, that there's no purpose in trying to solve it. And usually for me, that's natural systems or different aspects of nature, like that just enrapture my attention and I don't have to figure them out. I can just take in kind of the beauty of those patterns and the way things grow. I love it.
it,
I
it's
love watching ants.
it's oh my god, I'm obsessed with ants. I was keeping ants for a short period before moving houses. I'm obsessed with ants.
They're,
So there's another project you've done that I think we could briefly chat about. It's
hmm,
channel. Do you want to talk about that as well?
sure, a channel is probably my favorite thing I've ever built that hasn't ever technically been released or exhibited. I
So
didn't
it's a
really have a way to
premiere.
get it anywhere. I mean, I guess. Um, so the idea is, I love spooky, occultish stuff. Like, I think it's just really interesting. I love ghosts. I am constantly trying to find them, and I will pay good money if you can give me a ghost.
And they're trying to
Uh,
find you as well, I'm sure. That's a problem.
yeah, yeah. So I'll pay if you've got a ghost, cash money for you.
I can
So
make one if
channel,
you say so. I can make one.
well, I thought it would be funny someday to write, and I was worried about how people would take this, but I wanted to write a satirical book about how to make a ghost. And it would have just been like really dark. Like, well, depending on what kind of ghost, like you want a vengeful ghost, like here's how to make someone real mad and then, well, kill them. But but back to channel. The idea was, uh, I wanted to incorporate a really interesting data source into an automated Ouija board. Uh, and what I came up with was pulling data from the closed captions of live television transmissions.
Oh my god,
It,
I didn't imagine that.
and it's really interesting to me also because these signals, these like open, unencrypted signals that are flowing around everywhere are going to disappear at some point. They literally are going to end up as ghosts of part of our like technological
So they
progress.
really are
Eventually,
ghosts.
yeah, they really are ghosts. Eventually, they're like any signal is going to be encrypted. You're not going to be able to tap into stuff like this. It just won't exist. So I wanted to create a project that captured some of that now while it was still possible. And so what it's doing is that I just bought a $15 TV tuner off Amazon and hooked it up to a special Arduino board. I'm pulling in the VGA signal, and closed caption data is actually stored at one of the top lines. It's like line 11, line 13, something like that. I don't remember. But there's a visual line that where it has 8 white dashes or an absence of a dash for that bit. So that means every frame uh, you can have two or yeah, 1 byte of information, but with interlaced you end up getting 2 bytes. So it's like 60 bytes a second. So it's enough where you can uh, get text that is able to keep up more or less in real time. So I basically take that visual data, I parse it for those white lines, turn it into bytes. It sends it to a Raspberry Pi that's running this whole thing, and then it's just grabbing phrases constantly. And then whenever the Ouija board is activated, it just takes the last phrase that came through. So there may be like a couple second delay sometimes, but it's usually like it's pretty instantaneous. Like if you had a TV on with the closed captions on, you would probably see them at about the same time. And then it has a few simple rules to decide what phrases are good phrases. Uh, which, I mean, all I'm really talking about is I want the phrases to be properly mysterious, not too long. And length is the biggest one. By having them, say, under 26 characters, you get phrases that are either very short questions or short statements and are kind of properly vague because they're part of some television show somewhere. So it's not giving you much context. And so it makes it really interpretable. So I've had that Raspberry Pi recording closed caption data for months and months and months and months and months. Um, but usually the idea for channel is that it runs in real time. And I have a whole document that describes like how I would build this and how I would install it in a real space because it's meant to be embedded inside of a square table where 4 people sit down, and then there's kind of a brass engraving that gives you the instructions and also serves as like a touch sensitive component. It detects that people are there. You take each other's hands and you call upon the spirits, and then like some lighting effects maybe. And now like after Robin was playing around with vapes for smoke,
I've
probably a
seen
smoke
that. I've
machine.
seen that.
Probably a smoke machine. And then so create something that could be uh kind of the story you could tell. And you could do it just yourself, but the like it would be that much more satisfying having like 3 other people with you and all like talking to these spirits together. And what's interesting is it's these are words people said probably decades ago in some old Western television show or a a documentary on the circus.
It's really interesting. So we have a couple of questions. One is from Beat Crusher again asking, how many motors does the Ouija board need? Two?
Yeah, it's just two because it's just XY plotter essentially. Like it's a modified custom plotter.
So something that I don't know if people will be able to hear it, but it's that what I find very spooky about the Ouija board thing is the sound. So I don't know if people can
Oh,
hear it.
I have I do have thoughts about that. So
No,
it makes
I don't think they can hear it.
no, no, they can't.
They can
But it makes
probably.
kind of whiny motor sound.
It is absolutely terrifying. I'm not
But
kidding. It is terrifying. Like
part of
it's
the design, Alan, is I have microphone for the Raspberry Pi specifically and speakers so I can record and and make feedback based off the sound of the motors. The final design is meant to actually take that sound and then make it particularly creepy and weird by just by running it through a little bit, maybe applying some audio filters to it, but to take what, if you understand how it runs, like the sound makes sense, even though it is kind of a weird, scary sound, but taking it just a little beyond that. And because at first I was like, oh, it's so loud. And then I was like, it's not a bug, it's a feature. And that's what designers do, right? So,
Oh, you should do the opposite. You can move it around to play music. I've seen like a
oh
YouTube
God,
channel that
I've
does,
seen printers do that. Yeah.
yeah, or like with floppy disk reader thing. So well, hi Robin. Robin has
Oh,
arrived.
yay!
So we
Hi,
have we
Robin.
have another question from team.
Sure.
Do you see any parallels between channel and musical genres like vaporwave of hypnagogia? It, I hope I pronounce
Oh,
it correctly.
uh, let's see. Parallels between channel and music genres. I'm not even sure how to compare those things. Like, I mean, because yeah, I'm a big fan of vaporwave. In fact, my main code editor right now, I just turned it to a very vaporwave theme because I just needed some vibrant, like glowy magenta colors. Or
Broken shader color.
yeah, yeah, basically, I wish I could have it glitchy too. Um, I don't know. I mean, what would you call this? It's maybe an even older style, like spooky wave. It's like
What I
uh
really like is
alt
that
wave.
all over the Ouija board and the planchette, you have like trademark registered. Like Jesus Christ, you,
Oh
you want
yeah.
to use it for ghosts?
Hey, if
There wasn't any
you if
need
you
to.
create the de facto way of talking to the dead, you want to hold on to that. You don't want to just like people to start making their own knockoff boards that are getting like, because what if like I make a knockoff board and it's only talking to the ghosts of dead cats or something like that? Like that's a lot of, then you get support calls and it's a mess.
But no, it's good. I didn't realize that it was actually getting the sounds from real transmissions. I think this really makes it quite spooky. Even just like knowing, like reading those kind of like pieces of text from lost transmissions, flying through the ether. I think it's kind of really interesting. And a bit crusher says capitalism monetized on the dead. Well, I think it monetized on the living, wanting, hoping to talk with the dead, but
Oh yeah. Yeah, I desperately want to do a full installation of channel. It's like it's just so good, right? Like, and it's not often that I'm like, oh yeah, this is mwah, with like my own work, but this one's good. So if anybody wants to pay for a large table to be built with a Ouija board in
send
it,
money to me and I will send it to him.
and I've got a whole report on how it would work. So because I know people like that sort of thing, documentation. But yeah, channel, it's pretty good stuff.
So there's an ASMR moment, and after that, there's a sort of final question that I asked to all the guests. So, how many versions of Unity do you have installed on your machine?
Ooh, I do know the answer to this. I went through a culling recently, uh, where I was trying to reduce the number because my hard drive keeps hitting that almost full part. So right now I only have three installed.
The shame, the shame.
Yeah, right.
Are
Like
you
I
even a
had
developer?
like
Come
closer
on.
to six. But right now I have whatever the latest 5.6.x is, because that's when I had a license. Uh,
And it
and
was
then
also
like
probably one of the most stable one as well.
oh yeah, before stable releases became just a place to put giant experimental features that aren't finished. Not sure how that works. Maybe don't do that so people start using and get dependent on features that you're going to instantly break. And no, it is not good enough to just say they're experimental.
Don't get me started. Don't get me
Oh,
started on the.
geez, Unity. Yeah, they better make some changes because with what Unreal's been pulling lately, like
No,
the
no, no,
tide's
no.
gonna
What
turn
what's
real
going to
quick.
happen? And we'll be talking about ghosts, about Ouija boards. So I have like a premonition, like charm style. So what's going to happen is that now that Unreal has, unleashed their new technologies, now the universal pipeline and the high definition will be deprecated again. And a new one will appear at some point in 1 year or two. And the universal will be legacy universal in the same way the standard pipeline now is legacy standard. And
Yeah.
I'm like, you know you're going to do it. Do not call things standard, universal, stuff like that, because you know you're going to call them legacy standard in 2 years. And I find this
Well,
very disingenuous because they know it. Like, it's the same reason why they keep calling Unity with the year so that it always feels it's fresh. I don't think that's a good thing.
mm-mm.
Because then it forces them to push. I mean, my take on that is that then it forces them to push changes to justify
Yeah.
the new because they can't say
Yeah, I don't want fresh. I want worn.
I
I
want
want a patina
stable.
on that. Like I want I want it to be like that old book you've got that you're like, trusty old thing. Like
But no, no, no. If I start talking about Unity, it's a love-hate relationship.
it is.
it's very,
It is an amazing tool that has decided to do some things over the last few years that make it much, much harder to reliably use.
yes. I think that Unity is doomed because of these. I think
Yeah.
it's doomed. But I have a very love-hate relationship. It's very Freudian at this point. So better if I don't say anything else about that.
Yeah.
But so I think that we've been chatting more or less for 1 hour. So I think thank you so much for your time. And
Yeah.
I think it was really nice to see the variety of different projects you've been working on.
Yeah.
From very technical, from physical, from consultancy stuff, from Pico 8, from electronics. I think it's very refreshing to see someone that doesn't crystallize themselves on a single technology like maybe I've done, but that they spawn across. They're not
Yeah.
afraid to play with new technologies in the same way that I think you have done. So before we wrap this up, is there anything you
Mm.
want to add where people can find you, where they should go?
Yeah. My website is jerrytron.com. Just like it sounds, Jerrytron. My Twitter is Jerrytron with a 3 instead of an E because somebody has that Twitter account and has never tweeted, but Twitter is an awful platform. Uh, yeah, I've got a new portfolio up. I'm like I said, I'm kind of looking for work. I'm getting looking for like technical producing and design work in the
What
world.
does it
And
even mean?
what, technical producing?
Yeah.
Well, honestly, what it means is actually hiring someone for your team that takes care of all of the random work that's landing on your developers, your designers, your artists that is distracting them from what they are most valuable at. A lot of logistical things, pipeline, workflow, like solving problems, really. It's basically analyzing the resources you have as people, as technology, and figuring out how you can smooth out all that stuff so people can just do what they do. And I like doing that. I love a good spreadsheet. I make
Who
very fancy
doesn't?
spreadsheets for very mundane things.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, exactly, right?
The wood
But
runs on
yeah,
spreadsheets. That's my new sort of catchphrase, but it's definitely true. So we actually have a last minute suggestion from Bitcrusher. Jerry, you can PM Twitter support if they're inactive to take handle over.
ha! Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. I mean, I'll certainly try. But I talk to people that work for Twitter, and I've taken every avenue I can think of, and everybody says, nope, can't do it. Sorry. So I don't. I mean, thank you, and hey, if you're right, I'll buy you a beer, but I also do not believe it at all.
Remember this
I'm sorry.
date. Remember this date. Someone might ask for a beer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'll PayPal you the beer right away. I'd Venmo you, but I don't understand Venmo or why it exists or why it's owned by the same people as PayPal, but they don't intersect, or why you'd want payments to be social. But now we're getting into some other murky waters, so I'm gonna stop.
But really, thank you so much for being here tonight or today. I don't know what time it is where you are. But people probably they can find your contact down below, and if not, they can tweet at both of us, and I'm sure we will be very happy to answer. But again, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Alan. This was super fun. It was super good to see you. And thanks everybody that watched and asked questions. This is fun.
Bye. So before we close off, thank you to all of you who send messages. I'm always complaining that I don't get enough comments, and I think that today we got too many comments. Well, there's nothing as too many, but thank you so much to all the ones of you who would have joined the stream. Now, as you know, every week we have a guest, or I try to bring on a guest. And next week is not going to be different. And I'm really excited because we're going to have Sam Reed. And he's going to show one of his game that actually has never been released, and I don't think people have ever had a chance to see it. Now, when Sam showed me this game called Loco, I was like, I need to have this on the show. I absolutely need to have this on the show. And if by any chance there's any hope to resurrect Loco, I will be the happiest person to support that. But hopefully next week we can discuss it. Now, if if you don't know, Sam Reed is an indie game developer and a producer. He's based here in the UK. And in the past, he has been working on a variety of different projects, including the BAFTA-nominated Gang Beast, Main Links, and Dream. Not current Dream, but 2013 Dream. It's a different game. He also worked for Hypersloth, making a variety of other things. And in 2014, he was also nominated as one of developers 30 under 30. I believe it's the same year where I was nominated. So maybe we are sort of 30 under 30 buddies. I don't know. I will have to ask you. Well, I don't think I'm a 30 under 30 anymore. Well, unfortunately, we're going for 34 very soon. So that's a bit upsetting. But beside that, I want to thank you all, not just for joining, but also all the people that have been supporting me on Patreon. I think that you can probably see throughout all the sessions, all the episodes that have been done so far, that even things that you don't believe are complicated, like a simple receipt printer that prints stuff, or a LED strip with a moving pixel, they actually have dozens, hundreds of hours of work behind it to make them the thing they are. And this show is no different. It might last 1 hour. Trust me, it doesn't take 1 hour to set it up. And in the same way, as you know, I release tutorials on Patreon. I would say once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. It's getting harder to keep up, but there is so much more. There is so much more work behind tutorials and the work I do that people can usually see, because for everything I post, for everything I publish, for everything you can read, usually there are like 15 more. Well, maybe not 15, maybe 3 or 4 more that actually did not work. So there is way more work, and it is thanks to all these awesome people right here that I'm able to keep doing it, and I was able to do this for so many years. So thank you so much to all the people that have been supporting me throughout this time, especially in a time that is so stressful for anyone right now. So with that being said, thank you for watching, thank you for supporting me, thank you for supporting all the creators that you really enjoy. It's the reason why we can keep this doing. And with that being said, I hope you will join me as well next week at the same time, Wednesday, 7 p.m. BST. I hope to see you there. Hopefully with as many comments as we had today. So see you next week. Bye.